The intent of the bill, so House File 2690 is I've got the House file. The Senate file is Senate File 3490. And the intent is that, it's great. This is a wonderful nation. I'm honored to be a citizen and resident of this great nation. And the founders gave us a great gift in the form of government we've got. And the states birthed the Constitution, birthed federal government. But over the centuries, it's shifted, it's drifted to where the federal government has a little more power than the original intent. Because again, the states were the source of that power that granted and birthed the federal government. And so the idea here is to return to the individuals, the citizens, and the states, the powers of original intent, so that we're the ones that make the choices. We're the ones that decide. And the federal government stays within the boundaries of its original definition. Now, we do have some people here. Mr. Meckler is involved nationally, and he can fill in. We've got states that have passed, states like Minnesota that have ongoing legislation, and I'll let him maybe give a little bit of an update.
Sure. My name is Mark Meckler. I'm the president of Convention of States Action, and we're the organization that is pursuing this project nationally all across the country. The project was founded in August of 2013 with the sole aim to redefine in this country, or to re-answer the question, who decides? In our founding documents, the founders answered that question very clearly, big calligraphy, we the people. Today, over 230 years later, things have dramatically changed in the country. The vast majority of the power now resides in Washington, D.C. I often say D.C. stands for doesn't care, because the truth is, if you spend much time inside the Beltway, what you find is what they're really concerned about in Washington, D.C. is mostly about their own pocketbooks, about re-election, about getting wealthy on the backs of the citizens. And I want to be clear when I say this, I mean that of both parties. And this is an indictment of both parties in Washington, D.C. They are disconnected from the American people. And the discontent is great all across the land, all across the political spectrum. On regular polling, roughly 70 to 72% of the American people say that the federal government is too big and does too much. And while we might disagree on a partisan or ideological basis about which things are too big and what is too much, we are not in disagreement about where the power currently resides compared to where it should reside. The vast majority of the Americans believe that the power to make decisions about their own lives should reside with them personally, with their families, in their communities, in their cities, and ultimately in their states, and that the vast majority of power in the country should not be in Washington, D.C. Today, on average, in the states across the country, I've been in 43 states in the last 2 years. I can tell you in the legislatures, roughly 60 to 65% of all state budgets are controlled in one form or another by the federal government. That's an incredible statistic, and most citizens in the states are not aware of this. So when you vote for your local legislator, your local representative or senator, you're voting for somebody that has 35% of the power that they ought to have and that they ought to be exercising on your behalf. So the Convention of States project is designed to take power away from Washington, D.C. and restore it to the people in the states, acting through their state legislatures. So far, in the last 4 years, that resolution calling to restore the power, calling for a convention to restore the power, has passed in 12 states around the country. That legislation or that resolution is currently pending in 24 legislatures across the country, Minnesota among them. We're really excited to be here in Minnesota because of the people. This is a movement that comes from the bottom up. There are not politicians leading this movement. There are not companies or gigantic organizations leading this movement. There are citizens in each and every state that are leading this movement. In this state alone, over 13,000 citizens have signed up. Over 3,000 citizens just in the last several months have signed up to support this project, to ask the legislature to join the call for a convention of states. Every state has a state leadership team. You have extraordinary leadership in the state, some of them standing in this room today. I'm going to introduce one of them briefly here who will tell you the state of play in the legislature today. Why we're here, why I'm here, having been in 43 states this year, is because Minnesota is important. This is a bellwether state. I mean, you guys know people pay attention to the politics in this state, and there are important things happen here in every electoral cycle that people are paying attention to. And it is time for, in my opinion, for Minnesotans to reclaim their heritage, to go back to a system of governance where most of the decisions about the lives of Minnesotans are made here in Minnesota. That's why we're asking the legislature, both houses, to pass their resolutions to call for a convention of states to restrain the scope, the power, and the jurisdiction of the federal government. With that, I'm going to introduce Steve Davidson, and Steve is our legislative liaison here. He's the guy that's the daily, regular boots on the ground in the Capitol here working with the legislators. You can kind of tell us the state of play here in the state, Steve.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I don't know so much about the state of play other than we are extremely fortunate to have had it just introduced into the Minnesota Senate this morning. And Representative Quam filed it at the end of last session, and it's still in play. And we are gaining tremendous support day by day in the Minnesota legislature. And that's critical, of course. But what's really important, and Mark touched on it, and that's the grassroots support. This is a grassroots movement. And the entire process depends on whether or not the American people are going to stand up and demand this and show their strength, which is growing every day, now 3.2 million people across the country. For myself personally, I'm here because as a Vietnam veteran, I swore an oath to protect and defend this Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath does not expire until I do. And I'm here to fight for my kids and grandkids, and for your kids and grandkids, because I fear the government they will have, the lives they will have, when this immoral $20 trillion debt that the federal government has produced for us caves in on their lives. I fear for the lives they will lead when the more than $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities coming from the federal government crashes in on their lives. I'm fear for the lives our kids and grandkids will lead when federal regulations created by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats reaches into every nook and cranny of their lives and destroys their liberty. I fear for the lives our kids and grandkids will lead if they are governed by a ruling elite in Washington, D.C., who believes that sovereignty in America lies with their own political party, with their own political power, and money from special interests. It's time that the American people stand up and boldly go after this and restore America to being governed with the consent of the governed, and again, a government of, by, and for the people. And that's what we're about today, to take these first steps to rally the public, the people, and to make sure our state legislators know that they were chosen in 1787 by our founding fathers for this role. The power is in the state legislatures. The president has nothing to do with it. The Congress is bypassed by this process. The governor need not get involved, and it lies entirely on the shoulders of the state legislatures. And that's exactly what the God-given brilliance of the founding fathers intended. So thank you very much.
Are there any questions? I can say that over 100 of my constituents have signed up and supported. So this is, in my district and across the state, the effort is coordinated nationally because we don't want to have the past mistakes of where if you don't have the right language, you have dozens of states pass an amendment and you run out of time. So we're being intelligent how we do this. We had, a couple summers ago, we went off to representatives from all 50 states to discuss how this convention would work and what the amendments might look like. So this has not been a flash in the pan, oh, gee, let's do this weekend. This has been building and growing. And we're joining about, 24 currently. 24 states that have current bills, along with ones that have already passed. And I think this is what the founders deserved, is for us to continue the effort. but state by state, to come together and help this country become what it ought to be.